I never imagined that the brightest smile in my world would fade so quickly, dimming day by day until it seemed like a candle fighting against the wind. Amelia, my little girl with eyes the color of springtime, began to change in ways that unsettled me. At first it was subtle. She ate less at dinner, pushed her plate away claiming she wasn't hungry, even though she used to beg me for seconds. I convinced myself it was just a phase, something all children go through, but inside me, an unease started to grow. What mother doesn't notice when her child's laughter is replaced by quiet sighs? I told myself I was overreacting, yet every morning she looked a little paler, her steps a little slower. By the second week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Amelia's clothes seemed looser on her small frame, and when I hugged her, I could feel her bones pressing against me like sharp reminders of my failure to protect her. Her teacher called, concerned about how often she seemed distracted in class, her head drooping onto her desk. I felt shame tighten around my chest like a rope, because what answer could I give? I worked hard to provide for us, to shield her from harm, but what good is any of that if I can't even keep her healthy? Every night I sat by her bed, brushing her hair back from her clammy forehead, whispering prayers into the silence as though someone above might answer. The doctors didn't help much. After one rushed appointment, they told me it might just be a virus, or maybe stress. Stress, they said, as though a 7-year-old could possibly be weighed down by the burdens that crush adults. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them they weren't listening, that my instincts as a mother screamed louder than any lab result. But they gave me painkillers, a few empty smiles, and told me to monitor her. I left that office clutching Amelia's small hand, feeling like I was walking through fog, trapped between fear and denial, desperate for clarity that never came. At home, I tried to do everything right. I cooked her favorite meals, chicken noodle soup, pancakes with blueberries, even the macaroni and cheese she always begged for, but she barely touched any of it. Instead, she would ask in a faint voice, "Can I have Grandma's soup instead?" At the time, I was almost relieved. At least she was eating something, I thought. My mother, Margaret, often picked her up after school when I had late shifts, and Amelia would come home with a thermos filled with my mother's homemade broth. It seemed to be the only thing she wanted. I didn't question it then. I didn't dare, but I noticed patterns. Whenever Amelia ate at home, she grew tired, her eyelids drooping before the dishes were even cleared. Sometimes she'd rush to the bathroom, her little body trembling as she vomited. My heart would pound as I rubbed her back, whispering reassurances even though I had no idea what was wrong. Margaret brushed it off whenever I mentioned it. "Children are delicate," she'd say, her voice sharp, her eyes harder than I remembered from my childhood. "You always worried too much, Zoe." She said it with such certainty that I doubted myself, ashamed of my paranoia. Yet the nights were the hardest. I would watch Amelia sleep, her chest rising and falling too shallowly, her lips pressed tightly together as though holding in secrets she couldn't share. Sometimes she whimpered in her dreams, words spilling out that I couldn't fully understand. Once, I thought I heard her whisper, "No more soup, please." My stomach dropped when I heard it, but by morning I convinced myself I had imagined it. The alternative was too unbearable, too terrifying to consider. Still, her nightmares became my nightmares, both of us caught in an invisible storm. I started to think about my own childhood, about how Margaret used to insist on giving me tonics when I was Amelia's age, bitter, foul-tasting liquids that she swore would make me strong. I hated them, cried over them, but she never let me refuse. Back then, I never questioned her. What child would? Now, memories I had buried began to resurface, prickling at me like splinters I couldn't pull out. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that history couldn't possibly be repeating itself, but unease settled into my bones like a chill I couldn't shake. By the end of the month, Amelia's decline could no longer be disguised as anything ordinary. Her once rosy cheeks had hollowed, her laughter was rare, and every time I carried her upstairs to bed, I felt as though I was carrying a porcelain doll that might shatter if I wasn't careful. That night, as I tucked her in, she clutched my wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "Mommy, please don't tell Grandma I told you." But she didn't finish her sentence. Her eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her under before she could speak again. My heart hammered in my chest, knowing that whatever she hadn't said held the key to the truth I was too afraid to face. The next morning, my unease grew too heavy to carry alone. I decided to visit my mother's house, the same home I grew up in, the place where memories clung to the walls like shadows. Margaret greeted me at the door with her usual tight smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Zoe, you look tired," she said, her voice calm yet edged with something I couldn't name. Inside, the smell of herbs and broth filled the air, so strong it clung to my clothes. For a moment, I felt like a child again, standing there powerless, my mother towering above me with her rules and commands. Amelia ran into the kitchen and hugged her grandmother, her small face lighting up for the first time in days. "Grandma, do you have soup?" she asked eagerly, her voice filled with an innocence that cut me to the core. Margaret's expression softened only then, and she nodded, pulling a pot from the stove. The steam rose, carrying with it a scent that was both comforting and unsettling. I wanted to scream, to grab the bowl away, to demand answers, but fear held me frozen. What if I was wrong? What if my suspicions were nothing but paranoia born from exhaustion? I watched as my mother ladled the broth into a bowl. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, and I noticed the way she glanced at me out of the corner of her eye. "It's good for her," she said before I could ask, her tone sharp, final, like a blade cutting through the air. Amelia sipped eagerly, her shoulders relaxing, her smile widening. My heart clenched, torn between relief and dread. What kind of mother doubts her own mother? But as Amelia drank, I swore I saw Margaret's lips curl in satisfaction, as though feeding my daughter was a victory over me. The house itself seemed different to me that day. The wallpaper peeling in the hallway, the photos of me as a child smiling alongside a woman who now felt like a stranger. My childhood bedroom door was slightly ajar, and for a moment I considered walking in, searching for something, anything, that might confirm my fears. But the weight of my mother's gaze stopped me. Margaret always had a way of making me feel small, like a trespasser in my own life. Even as an adult, even as a mother myself, I felt the pull of her dominance, a silent warning not to cross boundaries. Over lunch, Margaret asked about my work, about the bills, about the cracks in my life she seemed to enjoy exposing. "You've always been too soft, Zoe," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Too emotional. That's why Amelia listens to me. She needs someone strong." Her words were daggers wrapped in silk, designed to cut while sounding like advice. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Inside, I burned with anger, but also shame, because a part of me feared she was right. What if I wasn't enough for Amelia? When I excused myself to the bathroom, I couldn't resist peeking into the kitchen as I passed. My mother stood at the counter, her back turned, pouring something into the soup pot from a small glass jar. The substance was white, fine like powder, and my blood ran cold. I froze, unable to breathe, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure she'd hear it. She turned suddenly, her eyes meeting mine, and for a split second, I saw something in her face, a flicker of defiance, or maybe challenge. "Did you need something, Zoe?" she asked calmly, her voice too smooth. I mumbled something about washing my hands and shut myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink until my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed, a mother caught between fear and fury. Could it be possible? Could Margaret be doing something to Amelia, just as she had done to me all those years ago with her so-called tonics? I felt the old wounds of my childhood ache, memories pressing at the edges of my mind, like ghosts demanding to be remembered. My stomach churned, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. When Amelia and I finally left that day, my mother hugged her tightly, whispering something in her ear that I couldn't catch. Amelia nodded, her face serious, as though carrying a secret too heavy for her small shoulders. My chest constricted at the sight, a desperate urge rising in me to protect her at all costs. As we walked to the car, Amelia leaned into me, tired again, her small hand cold in mine. I buckled her in, glanced back at the house one last time, and saw my mother standing at the window, watching us. Her smile was gone, replaced with an expression I had never seen before, an expression that confirmed my darkest fears. By the time I rushed Amelia back to the hospital, her body felt like a fragile doll in my arms. She was pale, her lips dry, her breath shallow. I carried her through the automatic doors as if the ground beneath me would disappear if I let her go. Nurses hurried over, their faces shifting from professional calm to urgency as they laid her on a bed. I stood frozen at her side, watching monitors beep and lines move, praying silently that she wouldn't slip away before answers came. My hands shook so badly I pressed them together just to feel like I still had control. The doctor entered quickly, a tall man with tired eyes named Dr. Harris, his presence steady but not unkind. He asked questions in rapid succession. When had the symptoms started? What had she been eating? Was there any history of illness in the family? My answers felt inadequate, weak, stumbling over themselves. The only truth I knew was that Amelia was fading before my eyes, and I was powerless. "We'll need to run some tests," Dr. Harris said, but his voice held a hesitation, as if he already suspected something more sinister. My chest tightened. When he leaned closer to Amelia, his tone softened. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what you've been eating lately? Anything different?" Her small eyes flicked to mine before darting away, and I saw fear written across her tiny face. She hesitated, lips trembling, then whispered so faintly I had to strain to hear, "Grandma's soup." The words cut into me like glass, sharp and undeniable. Dr. Harris stilled, pen hovering above his chart. He crouched closer. "What kind of soup, Amelia?" he asked gently, his eyes never leaving hers. Amelia's fragile voice cracked, barely audible. "She mixes the white powder from the baby bottle. She says it makes me strong." The room fell into silence, the kind that feels alive, charged with horror. I felt my knees weaken, my lungs refusing to pull in air. Dr. Harris's expression darkened instantly, the lines on his forehead deepening, his pen now still against the paper. The nurse who stood nearby froze as well, her eyes wide. For a moment, the beeping machines were the only sound, pounding like a heartbeat in a room too quiet to be real. I wanted to scream, to rip the walls apart, to demand why my mother, my own mother, would do something so monstrous. But all I could do was stand there in shock, my body trembling, my throat raw with the scream I couldn't release. "Are you sure, Amelia?" Dr. Harris asked softly, his tone steady yet urgent. My daughter nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes, as if afraid she had betrayed someone she loved. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, the betrayal slicing deeper than I thought possible. Dr. Harris straightened, his jaw tight, his voice clipped with professionalism masking fury. "We'll need to run toxicology tests immediately. If there's any substance in her system, we'll find it." He turned to the nurse, giving orders quickly, the calm authority of someone who had seen too many horrors, but never allowed himself to become numb to them. I sat in the chair beside Amelia's bed, gripping her small hand in mine, my mind spinning with 1,000 images, the jar in the kitchen, the satisfied curl of my mother's lips, Amelia's exhaustion after every visit. As blood was drawn and machines beeped steadily, I stroked Amelia's hair, whispering to her that she was safe now, that nothing bad would happen again. But even as the words left my lips, they felt hollow. How could I promise safety when the danger had been inside my own family, wrapped in the arms of the woman who had raised me? Shame pressed heavy against my chest, guilt gnawing at me for not seeing it sooner, for allowing Amelia to suffer under the guise of care. I had trusted my mother once, and that trust had poisoned us both. The waiting was unbearable. Every second stretched like hours as we sat in the sterile room, the smell of disinfectant clinging to the air, the walls closing in with their blank, silent judgment. I watched Amelia's eyelids flutter, her small chest rising and falling with effort, and I swore silently that no matter what, I would fight. I would tear down the walls of blood and family if I had to. I would not let Margaret touch her again. When Dr. Harris finally returned, holding the test results in his hand, his face was grave, his lips pressed into a thin line that told me everything before he even spoke a word. Dr. Harris closed the door behind him, as if to shield us from the rest of the world. His hands clutched a folder, but it was his face that made my stomach twist. Stone still, eyes grim, the look of a man preparing to deliver a truth that would change everything. I rose from my chair, gripping the side of the bed for support as my knees threatened to buckle. "Tell me she's going to be okay," I whispered, my voice shaking, though deep down I knew the answer would not come so easily. He looked at Amelia, then at me, and slowly opened the folder. "There are traces of a toxic substance in her system," he began carefully, his words deliberate. "It's consistent with repeated ingestion over time. Small doses, likely disguised, but enough to weaken her body severely." The words echoed in my ears, stretching into an unbearable silence after they were spoken. My mouth went dry, and my vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. Amelia turned her head toward me, Confusion etched into her pale face, as if asking why her grandma, her beloved grandma, would ever hurt her this way. I had no answer. Dr. Harris lowered his voice, almost cautious. Zoe, this wasn't accidental. Someone has been deliberately poisoning her. My chest constricted so tightly, I could barely breathe. Even though Amelia had already whispered the truth, hearing it from the doctor felt like being struck with lightning. It was no longer a suspicion, no longer a child's frightened words. It was fact. My mother, Margaret, had done this. The woman who once held me when I was sick, who sang lullabies by candlelight, had been feeding death to her granddaughter. The betrayal scorched me raw. The nurse in the corner shifted uneasily, clearly disturbed by what she was hearing. I sat down, clutching Amelia's hand as tears spilled uncontrollably down my face. Why? I choked out, though I knew Dr. Harris couldn't answer that question. Only Margaret could, and maybe even she didn't know why. Maybe she had crossed the line so long ago that cruelty had become second nature. I felt rage simmer inside me, a fire that both terrified and fueled me, because in that moment, I knew I would never forgive her. Dr. Harris leaned forward, his tone softer now. She's weak, but we caught this in time. Her body can recover with proper treatment. We'll monitor her closely, administer fluids, and start her on a detox regimen. But Zoe, he paused, his eyes piercing mine. You cannot allow her to be near that environment again. It isn't safe. My heart clenched, guilt pounding through me like thunder. I had placed Amelia in that environment. I had trusted my mother's gentle hands and warm smiles, blind to the poison she hid beneath them. Amelia squeezed my fingers weakly, whispering, "Mommy, I don't want soup anymore." The innocence in her voice shattered me. She didn't understand the depth of what had been happening, and I prayed she never truly would. I kissed her forehead, promising in a trembling voice that she would never have to taste that soup again, that I would protect her with every breath I had left. Inside, though, the words cut me in half, because promises felt fragile when the enemy wore the face of family. Dr. Harris handed me some papers to sign, his voice shifting back into professional tones as he explained the treatment plan and the necessity of documenting everything. "We will need to file a report," he said. "This is a case of intentional harm to a minor. Authorities will have to be notified." The room spun at his words. The idea of calling the police on my own mother filled me with dread, yet the thought of doing nothing made me sick. I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. My mother had crossed a line, and now the world needed to know. As the doctor left us alone again, I sank into the chair beside Amelia's bed. My hands trembled as I brushed her hair back, my mind unraveling with every memory of Margaret's forced kindness, every smile that now looked more like a mask. The truth was heavier than I could bear, yet it brought clarity. This was no longer about family bonds or old loyalties. It was about survival, justice, and the safety of my child. My mother had poisoned Amelia, but she had also poisoned something far greater, the fragile threads of trust that had held our family together. And I knew those threads could never be mended. The drive back to my mother's house felt endless, though in reality it was only a handful of minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, the tension radiating all the way to my shoulders. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, each one carrying both fury and disbelief. This was the house I had grown up in, the house that smelled of cinnamon on holidays and echoed with lullabies at night. Yet tonight, it felt like a battlefield. I wasn't just walking into my childhood home. I was walking into the lair of someone who had betrayed me in ways words could never fully describe. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the porch light glowing warmly, like a beacon inviting me inside, daring me to step into the trap. For years, that light had meant safety. It was the sign that Mom was waiting, that there was comfort within. Now it felt cruelly ironic, mocking me with its false promise of welcome. I sat in the car for a moment longer, gripping the small folder of hospital reports Dr. Harris had given me. They were my shield, my weapon, the undeniable proof of the truth that Margaret would never be able to dismiss as a child's fantasy. When I finally walked inside, she was sitting in her chair by the window, knitting, as if nothing in the world could disturb her calm. She looked up at me with a smile that used to soften my heart, but now only burned me with anger. "Zoe," she said warmly, as though she hadn't tried to kill the little girl who adored her. "You're back so soon. How's Amelia feeling? Did she perk up after some rest?" Her voice dripped with counterfeit concern, every word slicing through me like a blade. It was all an act. Her entire role as doting grandmother had been a performance, and now I saw the actress behind the mask. I slammed the folder down onto the coffee table, the sound breaking through her composure. Her needles paused midair, her hands trembling ever so slightly, though her face remained deceptively calm. "What's this?" she asked, her tone still trying to remain sweet, though I could hear the crack beneath it. My voice shook, not from fear, but from the sheer force of rage. "It's the proof, Mom. Proof that you've been poisoning my daughter. The doctors found the toxins in her blood. She told me about the soup, the powder you mixed in. Don't you dare lie to me again." My words were low, but the fury in them was volcanic. For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Then Margaret placed the needles gently on the arm of her chair, folding her hands in her lap. Her smile faded, but she didn't look surprised. Instead, she exhaled slowly, as though relieved the secret was finally out. "I only did what was necessary," she said, her tone chillingly steady. "You don't understand, Zoe. You never have. Everything I've done, it's been for you, for Amelia, for this family." Her words were twisted, a justification painted over with maternal devotion. I stared at her, stunned by how calmly she admitted it, as though poisoning her granddaughter was an act of love. "Necessary?" I snapped, my voice breaking. "How can you even say that? She's a child, your granddaughter. You nearly killed her." My tears blurred the room as my voice rose, finally unleashing all the hurt I had carried. Margaret's eyes glinted with something sharp, something I had never seen before. "You think the world is kind, Zoe? You think it spares the weak?" I was preparing her, making her strong, toughening her up the only way I knew how. Her words sent a shiver through me, because I realized she wasn't just justifying herself. She truly believed it. She thought cruelty was a form of love. I staggered back, clutching the edge of the sofa to keep myself upright. My childhood memories flooded in, the times she had scolded me harshly for mistakes, the nights when her affection felt conditional, the subtle control she always exerted. I had dismissed them as quirks of a strict mother, but now I saw them differently. She had always believed suffering was strength, that pain was the only teacher worth listening to. And now she had turned that twisted philosophy onto Amelia, blind to the innocence she was destroying. It was more than poisoning. It was indoctrination, masked as care. The rage inside me solidified into something stronger, sharper. "No more," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "You will never touch her again. You will never see her again. The police will know everything, Mom. Everything." Her face darkened for the first time, the calm mask cracking to reveal something feral beneath. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, her voice low, dangerous. "You'd ruin this family, ruin everything. You'd betray your own mother." I met her glare with fire in my eyes. "You stopped being my mother the moment you chose poison over love." Margaret rose from her chair slowly, her movements deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. I had never seen her this way before. The warmth and gentleness she once displayed were gone, stripped away to reveal a raw, unsettling darkness beneath. Her eyes locked on mine, blazing with a mixture of rage and defiance, but also something frighteningly certain, like she was absolutely convinced she was right. "You don't know the half of it, Zoe," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. "You think I've harmed her, but you don't understand what I've saved her from." My stomach knotted, my body trembling, because in that moment I realized she truly believed her lies. My heart pounded against my ribcage as I took a step back, every instinct screaming at me to protect Amelia at all costs. "Saved her?" I shot back, my voice breaking under the weight of my fury. "From what, Mom? From a life of love? From happiness? From growing up without fear?" Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away, needing her to see the steel in my eyes. "You almost destroyed her. Do you understand that? She could have died." I slammed my fist on the table between us, the folder rattling against the wood, the proof of her cruelty laid bare. Still, Margaret didn't flinch. If anything, she stood taller, emboldened by her delusion. "She would have died anyway," she spat, her voice rising for the first time. "This world doesn't spare fragile little girls. They get crushed, Zoe, just like you were nearly crushed. I made sure she wouldn't end up weak like you, crying, begging, depending on scraps of affection from others." Her words sliced through me, reopening wounds I had spent years trying to heal. All those nights I had felt unloved, unwanted, desperate for even a glance of approval. It hadn't been my imagination. It had been her. My mother had broken me as a child, and now she was trying to do the same to my daughter. Something inside me snapped, a strength I hadn't known I possessed surging to the surface. My voice steadied, hard as stone, carrying every ounce of pain I had ever endured. I will not let you write the same story with her that you wrote with me. Amelia will never know your poison again, literal or otherwise. I reached for the folder, clutching it to my chest like a shield. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she realized the power I held, her mouth twisting into something between a sneer and a plea. "If you hand that over to the police," she said, her voice trembling now, "you'll destroy us both. Everything I built, our reputation, our family name, it will all be ashes." Her words rang hollow, because reputation meant nothing compared to my daughter's life. "I don't care about ashes," I said firmly, my tone final. "I care about Amelia. I care about her smile, her laughter, her chance to grow up safe and loved. You should have cared too." For a moment I thought I saw something flicker in her expression. Remorse, maybe, or the memory of the love she was supposed to feel. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a cold fury that froze the room. She lunged forward suddenly, snatching the folder from my hands with surprising speed, her nails scratching my skin as she tore it away. I gasped, stumbling back, but I didn't hesitate. Adrenaline surged through me as I fought to grab it back, the two of us struggling like enemies instead of mother and daughter. Papers spilled across the floor, fluttering like fallen leaves. Margaret's breathing grew ragged, her face contorted with desperation. "You won't take her from me," she shouted, her voice breaking into a shrill, almost feral cry. In that moment, I saw not a mother, not even a grandmother, but a woman consumed by control, terrified of losing the grip she had held over generations. I dropped to my knees, scooping up the scattered pages as quickly as I could, my hands shaking as I clutched them to my chest once more. My voice rose in defiance, strong despite the tears burning down my face. "You've already lost her, Mom. Amelia belongs to me, and to herself, not to your twisted idea of love." I scrambled toward the door, my heart hammering, my breath ragged. Margaret stood frozen, her fists clenched, her eyes wide with the realization that she no longer had power over me. The silence between us was deafening, filled with years of pain and betrayal finally reaching their breaking point. As I reached the doorway, I turned back one last time. "Goodbye, Mom," I whispered, the words shaking but resolute. Her figure remained in the living room, swallowed by the shadows of the life she had built on control and cruelty. And for the first time, I saw her for what she truly was. Not a guardian, not a protector, but a woman who had lost herself long ago. The weight of my decision pressed on me, but so did the unshakable truth. Amelia and I would never return here again. The breaking point had come, and there was no turning back. The next morning, I sat in the hospital waiting room with Amelia asleep against my chest, her tiny body rising and falling with each fragile breath. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every word my mother had said, every accusation, every excuse. The folder of evidence lay on the chair beside me, the papers creased from our struggle the night before. Each page felt like a weapon, one that could save Amelia, but also burn the last threads connecting me to my family. My hands shook as I clutched it, because the choice wasn't just about justice. It was about ripping away the illusion of a mother I had spent my whole life trying to believe in. Detective Harris arrived shortly after dawn, his tall frame filling the doorway as he approached with calm, steady steps. His voice was low, respectful, but direct. "Zoe, the doctors called us after what your daughter said. We need to know everything." My throat tightened, my heart racing as I tried to find the strength to speak. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to demand someone else carry this burden, but the truth pressed at my lips, begging to be freed. I handed him the folder with trembling hands, my voice breaking as I whispered, "This is what she's been doing." He sat down across from me, flipping through the pages slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the prescriptions, the handwriting, the dates. With each page he turned, the reality solidified into something undeniable. "This isn't just neglect," he finally said, his tone grim. "This is intentional. This is attempted poisoning." My chest caved as the words hung in the air, heavier than I could bear. I felt sick, my stomach twisting at the truth I had already known but never dared to hear out loud. Margaret wasn't misguided. She wasn't confused. She was dangerous. The detective leaned forward, his expression gentle but urgent. "Zoe, If we move forward, this will mean a full investigation. Your mother could be arrested. Do you understand the gravity of that? Tears stung my eyes as I nodded. Because yes, I understood. But I also saw Amelia's pale face in the hospital bed, her little hands clutching her stuffed bunny, her innocent voice whispering, "Grandma's soup." If I stayed silent, I was as guilty as she was. My daughter's life mattered more than my mother's pride. It was time to choose. "I want her stopped," I said firmly, my voice low but resolute. "I don't care what it costs me. She can't be near Amelia again. She can't be near anyone's child again." The words shook as they left my lips, but I didn't falter. I had lived my life under my mother's shadow, believing her approval was the only thing I needed. But now I saw the truth. Her love had always been conditional, poisoned by control. And if I didn't end it now, Amelia would grow up thinking pain was love, just like I once did. Detective Harris gave a small nod, then motioned to his partner waiting outside. "We'll open the case today. The hospital will keep Amelia safe, and we'll make sure you're protected too." His words should have comforted me, but instead they left me trembling. Protected. From my own mother. The thought felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Margaret wasn't just my abuser. She was my blood, the woman who had given me life. Yet here I was, preparing to take hers apart with the truth. As he left, the weight of what I had done began to settle in. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Margaret's name flashing on the screen. My hand hovered over the button, my pulse racing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned the phone face down and pressed Amelia closer to me, whispering into her hair, "I've got you. You're safe now." Still, a shadow lingered in the pit of my stomach, a question I couldn't silence. What would Margaret do when she realized I had chosen to expose her? That night, as Amelia slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I sat by her side, staring out the hospital window at the darkened city. The police had taken my statement. The evidence was in their hands. The investigation had begun. And yet, I knew the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. Margaret would not go quietly. She had lived her entire life in control, and I had just torn it from her grasp. My greatest fear wasn't what the police would do next. It was what my mother would do. I barely recognized myself in the hospital mirror that morning. My face was pale, my eyes hollow from the sleepless nights of fear and suspicion, and my hands trembled as I tried to brush my hair. I wasn't just a mother fighting for her child's life anymore. I was a woman at war with the truth, a truth that seemed so unthinkable it twisted my stomach. My own mother, the woman who had rocked me to sleep and wiped my tears as a child, could be the very one responsible for poisoning her granddaughter. The horror of that possibility left me gasping for air. I replayed Emma's whispered words again and again, each syllable a knife cutting into me. How could I confront her? How could I look her in the eyes and demand to know why? Fear of the answer nearly broke me. The doctors decided to run a toxicology screen on Emma. I sat in the corner of the sterile room, holding her hand as the nurses drew blood. Her skin was so fragile, her veins so small, and yet she squeezed my hand gently, as if she wanted to comfort me instead of the other way around. I wanted to crumble in tears, but I stayed composed for her. The silence between each beep of the machines was deafening, and every second felt like an eternity. My thoughts kept spiraling back to my mother's kitchen, to the soups she proudly made, to the way she would insist, "This is good for her. Trust me." Those words, which once gave me relief, now made my heart race with dread. I wondered, had she been masking her intentions this whole time, or was there something more sinister beneath her insistence? Later that evening, I went home to gather a few things. The house was cold and quiet, yet every corner carried echoes of my mother's presence. The neatly stacked spice jars, the faint scent of lavender from the laundry, the photographs of Emma smiling in my mother's arms. They all stabbed at me with painful contradictions. I tried to picture her as a monster, yet the memories kept fighting against me. She had been my safe place, my anchor, and the one I always called in times of despair. To imagine she could deliberately hurt Emma was like tearing open a wound inside me. But my mind replayed Emma's frail little voice, whispering with fear, and I knew I could no longer hide from the truth. I sat at the dining table, staring at the folder where I kept Emma's medical papers. My hands brushed over the edges of each document, shaking. I realized this wasn't only about Emma's recovery anymore. This was about survival, justice, and unmasking the truth, no matter how horrifying it turned out to be. I thought of confronting my mother directly, demanding answers. But I also feared her charm, her manipulative smile that could disarm anyone. If she really had been hiding poison in the guise of love, then she was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. My phone buzzed suddenly, breaking me from my thoughts. It was a message from her. "How is Emma? Did she eat today?" The words chilled me. The next day, I returned to the hospital early. The results were still pending, but the doctor's eyes seemed heavier than usual when he greeted me. He didn't need to say much for me to feel the gravity of the situation. Emma lay in bed, her little chest rising and falling with effort, her small hand clutching her stuffed rabbit. I sat beside her, stroking her hair, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I told her she would get better, that I would protect her from everything bad in the world, even if the evil was coming from where we least expected it. She smiled weakly, but the light in her eyes dimmed so quickly it made me ache. Every moment with her felt like borrowed time, and I hated myself for even thinking that. That evening, when visiting hours were over, I sat in the car and called my brother, Daniel. My voice cracked as I told him everything. Emma's whisper, the doctor's suspicions, the white powder. He was silent at first, then finally said, "Zoe, you can't be serious. Mom would never." But even he couldn't deny the unease in his tone. "She loves Emma," he added, but the words rang hollow, as though he was trying to convince himself. I begged him to think back, to remember times when Mom's care felt controlling, when her kindness carried a weight of demand. Daniel didn't want to face it, but I could hear the cracks forming in his certainty. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my doubt. That night, I dreamt of Emma running in a field, her laughter like bells ringing, but each time I tried to reach her, she collapsed in my arms, limp and breathless. My mother stood in the background of the dream, smiling softly, holding a bowl of steaming soup. I woke up in a cold sweat, tears wetting my pillow, my body shaking. The line between dreams and reality blurred, but the dread stayed the same. I sat up, my heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "I will find the truth, no matter what it costs." For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me, not just fear, but determination. The following morning, the doctor called me into his office. The air in the room felt suffocating as he handed me the toxicology report. His eyes locked onto mine with a weight that nearly crushed me. "There were traces," he said softly, "of substances not meant for children. It matches certain medications. Powdered, diluted. Your daughter has been ingesting them for some time." My knees nearly gave out, and I clutched the desk for support. The paper trembled in my hand as the truth solidified in black and white. My mother, my own mother, had been slipping poison into Emma's food. My heart broke in ways I didn't know it could, but beneath the heartbreak, something fierce began to rise. This wasn't just grief anymore. It was war. The next morning, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Emma's hospital bed, her tiny body still weak from the days of poisoning, her breath shallow but steady. The folder of evidence lay open on the chair beside me, its pages crumpled from my constant handling, each document a testament to my mother's betrayal. I traced the lines of writing with my finger, trying to ground myself in reality, trying to convince myself this wasn't a nightmare. But the sterile scent of the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the faint hum of nurses outside the door, it all screamed that this was horrifyingly real. Margaret had crossed the line, had poisoned her granddaughter, and I held the proof in my hands. The weight of it pressed down on me, a crushing reminder that innocence alone couldn't protect the ones we love. Detective Harris called shortly after noon, and I could hear the urgency in his voice before he even spoke. "Zoe, we need you to come down to the station," he said. "We have enough to take immediate action, but I need your presence to proceed." My heart thudded violently in my chest. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was here, the reality terrified me. I glanced at Emma, her fragile form wrapped in blankets, and whispered, "Stay safe for me. Stay alive." I left her side reluctantly, each step toward the car heavy with dread and determination, knowing that what awaited me would change the course of our lives forever. At the station, I was led to a small interrogation room. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with an almost sinister intensity. Margaret sat across the table, calm and collected, her hands folded neatly, as though she had rehearsed this moment for years. When she saw me, her smile was faint but sharp, the kind that hid malice behind politeness. "Zoe, what is all this about?" she asked, her tone sweet and deceptively innocent. I clenched the folder tightly, feeling the papers cut into my palm. "Don't play games, Mom. I know what you did. I have proof, and the police are here to take action. This ends today." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I caught it, the recognition that her control was slipping. But she quickly masked it with a practiced, chilling composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "I love Emma. I would never hurt her." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. "Love? You call it love? You almost killed her. You used her as a pawn for your twisted control, just like you did with me. The proof is right here, and it's going to be in the hands of the authorities in minutes." The folder hit the table with a thud, papers spreading out like the fragments of my shattered trust. Margaret's jaw tightened, her fingers flexing around her knees. Her composure began to crack as the reality of exposure sank in. "You can't do this," she hissed, leaning forward slightly, her voice low and dangerous. "You'll ruin everything. Me, you, this family." But I no longer feared her threats. The child who had trembled in the shadows of her wrath had grown into a woman who would not be silenced. I met her gaze evenly, unflinching. "I'm saving my daughter, and I'm finally saving myself. You don't get to manipulate anyone anymore. Not me, not her." The words hung in the air like steel, sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Detective Harris stepped in then, calm but firm, placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Ma'am, you're under investigation for endangering a child. You have the right to remain silent." I watched her face, hoping to see shock, regret, fear, but instead, there was only fury, masked behind a tight-lipped expression that barely concealed the storm underneath. I realized then that she had never cared about consequences before. Control had always been her weapon, but now, for the first time, her grip was gone. My hands relaxed slightly, the burden of fear easing, knowing that Amelia's life was no longer in immediate jeopardy. That night, I returned to the hospital, exhaustion weighing on my limbs like lead. Emma slept soundly for the first time in days, her chest rising steadily, unburdened by poison. I sat by her bedside, brushing the soft strands of hair from her face, marveling at how fragile yet resilient she was. I whispered promises into the quiet room, promises of protection, love, and safety. My mother's betrayal would no longer define her life, and for the first time, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Each tiny breath she drew reminded me why I had fought, why I had exposed the darkness hidden within my own bloodline. And yet, even in the relief, I felt the weight of what had come and what would follow. Legal proceedings, family confrontations, media inquiries. Our lives would be irrevocably altered. I couldn't escape the knowledge that Margaret would retaliate in some form. She was too cunning, too consumed by her obsession with control. But I also knew I was no longer the powerless child who had trembled at her whims. I was a mother, a protector, and I had finally found the courage to stand between evil and innocence. The long battle was only beginning, but I was ready. As I held Emma close that night, I whispered a quiet prayer, asking for strength, clarity, and justice. Her warmth against my chest reminded me that we had survived the worst, and that love, true love, would always endure. The folder of evidence rested on the bedside table, a symbol of the confrontation that had finally begun, a weapon against lies and deception. I resolved then and there that no matter how far Margaret tried to reach, no matter how dark the path ahead, we would emerge intact, and I would never again allow fear to dictate my choices. For Emma, for myself, and for the fragile promise of a future untouched by poison, I vowed to keep fighting. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm I had been anticipating for months, each step toward the courthouse heavy with dread and determination. I carried Emma's small hand in mine, her tiny fingers curling around mine for reassurance, unaware of the full weight of what had transpired. Her innocence, fragile yet unyielding, was a stark contrast to the darkness I was about to confront. I could feel Margaret's eyes on us the moment we entered the building, her icy stare cutting through the crowd like a blade. She was immaculate, dressed to impress, every detail carefully curated as though appearances could erase the truth, but appearances no longer mattered. The evidence, the documents, the testimonies, all of it was mine, tangible and undeniable. My heart pounded, but I refused to show fear, because fear was exactly what she had thrived on all my life, and I would not feed it today. The courtroom was packed with family, lawyers, and a few sympathetic strangers who had heard whispers of the case. Margaret sat with a poised expression, attempting to radiate calm authority, but I could see the tension in her fingers, the slight tremor in her jaw. She was a master manipulator, but now her control was slipping, and it was exquisite to witness. The judge called the room to order, and I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the knowledge that I had done everything right. My hands rested on the folder I had brought, the thick stack of evidence that would finally force the truth into the light. Every breath I took reminded me of Emma, her safety, and the years of lies that had led us to this moment. As the prosecution presented the case, I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. The papers, photographs, and toxicology reports all lined up like soldiers, each one meticulously proving the horrifying reality of Margaret's actions. The room went silent as the doctor testified, confirming what I had long suspected. The substances in Emma's system were deliberate, measured, and administered over time. My mother's face betrayed the first signs of panic, her lips parting slightly as though words might escape, but none did. I held my breath as the gallery murmured in shock, the weight of truth pressing down like a tidal wave. My daughter's eyes met mine briefly, and I saw recognition, even at her young age, that we had survived the unthinkable. Then came my moment to speak, to stand not only as a witness, but as a mother fighting for justice. I rose slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room shift to me, some curious, others judgmental. My voice was steady at first, then filled with the raw emotion that had been building for months. For years, my mother has been the one who was supposed to protect me, to guide me, and now she has turned that trust into a weapon against my daughter. I paused, letting the words sink in. Emma was too young to fight for herself. She trusted the woman who should have loved her unconditionally. And yet every meal, every act of care, was laced with danger, poison, and deceit. The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with disbelief. I laid out the timeline, the subtle manipulations, and every piece of evidence I had painstakingly gathered. Margaret's face drained of color as I spoke, her carefully maintained composure crumbling under the weight of truth. I watched as the jury's expressions hardened, the reality of her actions etched into every line of their faces. For the first time, I felt a sense of empowerment, not over my mother, but over the fear she had instilled in me for so long. The fight that had begun at Emma's hospital bedside had reached its apex, and I could finally see the first glimmer of justice for my daughter. Margaret tried to speak, to defend herself with practiced eloquence, but the words sounded hollow, absurd even. Her attempts to charm the courtroom, to twist the narrative, fell flat against the undeniable evidence. The lawyer objected, and the judge ruled swiftly, silencing her. I felt a chill of satisfaction at this, knowing the power she had wielded for years was now neutralized by truth. Emma stirred slightly in my arms, her fragile grip reminding me that this moment was not just about punishment, but about reclaiming safety and love for the innocent. When the verdict was finally read, declaring Margaret guilty of child endangerment and imposing strict legal consequences, a wave of relief crashed over me. I exhaled deeply, tears streaming down my face as the magnitude of the moment sank in. Margaret slumped back in her seat, defeated, stripped of the power she had wielded with impunity for decades. I looked down at Emma, her small eyes wide and trusting, and whispered a soft promise that she would never know fear at the hands of the person who should have nurtured her. My heart swelled with love, and I realized that the battle had not only saved my daughter, but had also freed me from years of manipulation and silence. As we left the courtroom, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the city. I held Emma tightly, feeling her warmth, her heartbeat, and the resilience she had shown despite everything. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more legal proceedings, and more healing to do. But for the first time, hope was real and tangible. We had survived the unimaginable, and our bond had grown stronger than ever. And to anyone listening to our story, know this: courage and truth, no matter how painful, can conquer even the deepest betrayal. If you want to follow more stories of survival, resilience, and justice, please subscribe to the channel and join our journey, because every story, no matter how dark, deserves to be told.